Hey, my name is Ira Marks, and this is my Draw Diary. I was looking for a reason with this video to do some character sketches, and instead of making up some new characters or using characters from another project of mine, I thought I would go with some kind of famous characters from a film, because they're already defined. It's easy to work with them. I picked the 1985 John Hughes film, The Breakfast Club, which is the story of 5 teens who all have Saturday morning detention together. And at the beginning of the film, they perfectly encapsulate these really generic, one-dimensional stereotypes, which they overcome throughout the story. But this image, which is just a cast photo, it's not a scene from the film, really represents who they start the film as. And they all fit a role. So John on the left here is the rebel. Allison is the introverted goth. Andy is the jock. Claire is the prep. And Brian is the nerd. This was a great project for me because I am not good at the subtleties of body language. You know, to develop a character really well and make it clear to your reader or viewer or whatever purpose you're using these designs for is a lot of work. So since this film works so well already, it's really easy for me to just jump in here and start establishing how these characters should stand, what they look like, what colors I should use, and how their faces read and all that kind of stuff. You'll notice that I try to follow all the pretty common rules of character sketching. I start with the basic armature. It's like an advanced stick figure that has shoulders and hips to get them in place. It's really all about the shoulders and hips when you think about it. These are your actors in your story, and body language plays a big role, because at this point you could think of them as silent film actors, and their bodies need to do all the expressing. So I'm really working hard to make sure I'm catching all the subtleties of their posture from this photo, and even exaggerating them a little bit, because it's a cartoon. Cartoons are all about exaggeration. I sketched out a first layer, and usually you would go right into the final line work, but sometimes when I'm not really totally confident in what I'm doing and where my lines need to go, I do a second sketch on top of that first sketch. So that's what I'm doing here. This is not final line work. It's just a second draft sketch, which sometimes that's a dangerous thing to do because there should always be a looseness in a cartoon line. And if you plan too far ahead, the lines start to feel flat and motionless, you could say. I'm working really quickly here to just catch some of the details and proportions that I might have missed in that first round. The mouths are really important to me at this stage because that says a lot about the personality of the character as well. So I'll turn off that previous layer, kind of fill out a little bit more of this. I'm really wanting to make sure John looks good here. Make sure you get that hair just right. Here we go with the inking. Again, like I'll probably use in most of these videos, I'm working with Kyle Webster's brush kit. You can get it at kylebrush.com. This is a brush called, or it's a pen. This is a inking tool called Your New Favorite Inker. It's basically a calligraphy pen. It's got that kind of gritty, rough edge and a fairly consistent line weight, meaning line thickness. It's not like a brush. It doesn't vary a lot. It's got like a pull away sharp tip, but at your hardest pressure, you're still getting a pretty consistent, almost technical line. I would have started with John, but for some reason that character design makes me nervous. So I jumped over here on the right and I started with Brian. His clothes are so loose and ill-fitting that it makes him a little easier to draw. And you can see I kind of pushed him even a little further than he is in the photo. He's leaning away from the rest of the group. You know, throughout the film, he's kind of like maybe one of the more reserved characters, so you can see he's not quite comfortable standing close to everybody. Claire is the most confident of all the characters, so it makes sense that she's kind of stretching back and very casual in her body language. And here we are with Andy, who's just got this real smug look on his face, and I really wanted to bring that out by putting some extra lines in his face and getting those eyebrows just right. I'll give him some kind of dumpy, sporty sneakers. I never want to go over my line work more than once. That first line should always be the final line. But every once in a while, you just got to double things up, maybe to just get a little bit of a sense of shadow or a bit of extra thickness. In this case, I'm just going to undo and redo these lines. Okay, so I've got Allison's shoulders right here, and then we'll tackle John. He's got a lot of layers, so that makes it a little tricky. I want to get these collars right. And then his fist, gloved hand. I've decided I'm not going to do any hatching with my line work, which would be one approach if I was only doing this with ink. I'm going to add color later, but if this was just an inked illustration, I would probably come in and play with shadows a lot more and do a lot more inking work. But I'm just going for outlines with a couple wrinkles and stitch marks and buttons, but not a lot of detail in the line work. Gotta make sure I get these shoes right. He's got these combat boots on with a little heel. This belt needs to be redone. Skinnier 80s belt. There we go. A little more texture in Claire's hair because it's kind of got a frizzed out effect. I'll thicken these lines just a little to make them pop, but I don't want to overdo anything. Faces are really difficult for me, but I like what I've got here, so I'll move on to the coloring. And I always start with the base layer. I just block out my main colors. It's the midtones, you could say. They're not highlights or shadows. They're just a flat space of color. And I'll stick pretty closely to what's going on in this photo, so I'm not going to overthink it. I'm just going to come in and catch the main colors used in their outfits. I'm working with one of Kyle's gouache brushes. I think it's the Super Dry, I believe. It's got a nice texture to it. I'll zoom in later and show you in more detail. And I'm leaving a bit of transparency. I just when I block out the colors, I'm not overworking the areas because then I would lose all the texture, because that's how digital art works. At some point, you're just going to get a fully saturated color and it'll look very flat. So I'm working quickly so you can almost see the brush strokes in these colors. Every character has a really distinct palette, which is, something you might not appreciate when you're watching the movie or you're thinking about the story. But all this stuff really needs to be planned out, and that's what makes a project like this fun. It's a nice way to study the choices made by the artists working behind the scenes. I'll do a little hatching on this shadow layer just to bring a little more texture to it. So the rule for me with this image is I'm not going to catch any patterns. Like Claire's dress, I think, has a pattern on it that you can barely see, but I'm just going to execute that with a hatching technique. And that'll be consistent for all the characters. So when I get to Allison's dress here, I'll do the same thing as Claire's. And here's my highlight layer. I always turn my highlight layer to color dodge, and then I pick, often I go with purple, no matter what the palette. It seems to work pretty well because purple, can substitute as a black shadow color. When you turn on color dodge, it lightens it, and it's kind of a nice little highlight. I gotta catch that iconic John hair highlight there. The sleeves of Andy's coat are kind of a weird vinyl leather, so I'll put a little bit more of a highlight on there. Everybody in this film has pretty much the same skin tone, so I'll just go with this kind of generic peachy, off-white, yellowish color. I always step away and come back for one last layer of shadow and contrast because I'm always concerned that I'm not getting enough contrast in my images. For the background, I'm going to use this Birch Brush 2 and drop in this purple shadow. I don't want the lockers to stand out too much, so they don't get an outline. They're basically a pattern just to give these characters a sense of place. If I put an outline around them, I feel like it would be too distracting and it would blend in too much with the character designs. I could just outline and fill with the paint bucket, but you lose that sense of that hand-drawn look. So I'm going to do it the slow way. Okay, there's my lockers blocked out, and I don't want to bring too much detail to them. So I'll just add the vents at the tops of the lockers, the little number plates, vents at the bottom, and probably a shade of pink works. So these lines can be kind of distracting. We want to set them back a little. Shadows usually work best as a shade of purple. I never go back to black once I start coloring, because it takes away from that iconic line work. Got a little bit of stray line or color here I gotta clean up. And now just to see what happens, I'm gonna duplicate the inking layer and come over the top of it with some shades of color from the fabrics they're wearing. Yeah, I kind of like that. All right, I'll zoom in here for you so you can see the texture from these brushes. It's got a really nice effect. This good dry gouache look gives the characters a nice sense of roundness and texture. And there's a nice randomizer that he's built into these brushes, so you never really get the same brush strokes twice. It feels pretty natural. I'm pretty happy with the kit so far. I'll try to experiment with some more brushes in other videos so you get a better sense of the variety he's created. So there's your breakfast club. I hope you liked the video. Click subscribe if you want to follow along with my Draw Diary series. And if you want to support my work, you can buy prints over on my Society 6 page. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.